All right, today we're going to talk about the environment and climate change. We have three objectives. Number one, list and describe various renewable energy sources. Number two, explain the evidence we have that climate change is taking place. And number three, explain why the USA refused to sign the Kyoto Protocol and wants to leave the Paris Climate Agreement. So let's talk about climate change. In order to get roads and schools and factories and all this cool stuff, in order to develop the first world, that's the United States, that's Europe, burned lots of fossil fuels, especially coal. Burning fossil fuels has added a tremendous amount of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. It is believed that this carbon dioxide is what is causing climate change. Look at this graph up at the top. We can see carbon dioxide on the left, by year on the bottom, and we can see that carbon dioxide levels have, they've changed over the years, but they're all below this line. They've never been above this line, this 300 parts per million line, until 1950. And in 1950, it drastically increased and continues to increase to the current level. So it's believed that carbon dioxide causes climate change. We emit carbon dioxide when we burn fossil fuels. Therefore, it is believed that humans cause climate change. Now, the developing countries, the third world countries, the poor countries, they want to emit lots of carbon dioxide so that they can catch up to developed countries. They're going to have to burn fossil fuels to make factories and plants and roads and schools and build stuff. Developed countries do not want them to emit carbon dioxide because they want to prevent further climate change. You can see we're stuck in a catch-22. We're going to look at some evidence of climate change now. How do we know climate change is happening? Global sea levels have risen by almost 7 inches in the last 100 years. Global surface temperature reconstructions show that Earth has warmed since 1880, and most of that warming has occurred in the past 35 years, which interestingly enough is also when the carbon dioxide levels increased above that line, with 15 of the 16 warmest years on record occurring since 2001. The top 700 meters of ocean shows warming of approximately 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1969. That doesn't sound like a lot, but realizes the ocean is huge, so that's actually pretty warm. Also know that marine life can be harmed very easily by temperature fluctuations, so this is a little scary. Greenland, it's a very cold place up north above Canada, has lost somewhere between 36 and 60 cubic miles of ice per year between 2002 and 2006, and Antarctica lost about 36 cubic miles of ice between 2002 and 2005. Glaciers are retreating almost everywhere because of the warming, and this is what's leading to higher sea levels. The U.S. has also witnessed increasing numbers of intense rainfall events, more what are called 100-year floods, more hurricanes. And then since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the acidity of surface ocean waters has increased by about 30%. Again, marine life very susceptible to changes in the acid base levels and temperature fluctuations. Which brings us to alternative energy sources. If we're going to try to stop or reverse climate change, we have to stop burning and emitting carbon dioxide. The problem is that energy is what fuels our lives. We're going to have to find an alternative energy source that does not emit carbon dioxide if we're going to try to tackle this problem. Energy is a major security concern. Once again, we have to have energy. So we're going to have to find an alternative way if we believe carbon dioxide causes climate change and we want to reverse that. First is biomass. Biomass is just you burn basically plants, some sort of plant or plant product, to create energy. In the U.S., this is in the form of ethanol. Every time your parents or you fill up your car with gasoline, there is a % of ethanol in that gasoline. It is not pure gasoline anymore. Ethanol is an alcohol made from corn. So you're actually burning corn every time you drive in a car. The problem with biomass is, do we really want to power our homes and cars with food while lots of people starve to death? It's a tough call. Nuclear. Nuclear is a really good option. It creates large amounts of quote-unquote free energy. No real emissions. The problem with nuclear energy is that it is expensive to produce. You have to have really huge nuclear reactors. It also creates radioactive waste. And the other thing is do we really want all the countries in the world to have nuclear reactors? It's not that big of a leap to move from nuclear reactors to nuclear weapons. Which leads us to some renewable sources. The problem with the renewable sources is they're expensive and often inefficient. And I've got a list here, but there are more: wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, hydrogen. Hydrogen's really interesting. These are all really good, but solar panels are expensive. The windmills, wind farms are expensive. Geothermal operations are expensive. And as great as solar panels are, you have to have a lot of them to create a decent amount of energy. So in a lot of ways, they're inefficient. Hydrogen is really cool. We can see how hydrogen would work over here. You can actually use hydrogen, which is part of water, as an energy source. It's combustible. The problem with hydrogen is that the fuel cells are very, very, very expensive. There actually are several hundred hydrogen-powered cars in the United States that are driving. But again, it's very, very expensive to use hydrogen in this way. And we quite haven't figured out that problem yet, but it doesn't emit carbon dioxide, so that would be a win. Having a water-powered car would be pretty awesome. But again, renewables are expensive and often inefficient. 1997, most of the countries in the world signed what is called the Kyoto Protocol. Basically, it was an agreement to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Countries wanted to stop and possibly reverse global warming. But the USA, or global climate change, the USA refused to sign the protocol. The reason why the USA refused is because they said, if we sign this and we agree to limit our carbon dioxide emissions, that's going to hurt our economy. We're going to have to close factories down. We're going to have to stop mining coal. That's going to hurt development. It's going to hurt globalization. So the USA refused. Many third world countries signed, but in order to develop, ignored it. So a lot of people signed it and just said, yeah, we're not really going to do it. And there's nobody that can force them to do it. There is no enforcement mechanism. 2016, 195 countries agreed to limit, that's only 197, agreed to limit CO2 emissions in what are called the Paris Climate Accord, or the Paris Climate Agreement. There is a little bit better of an enforcement mechanism. There is an agreement that you would review each country's contribution of CO2 emissions every single year to see if you're actually meeting the targets you said you're going to meet. Rich countries would provide what is called climate finance to poor countries. They're going to provide $100 billion a year to poor countries to help them develop in a environmentally sustainable and friendly way. This was signed by the Obama administration. But once Donald Trump took office, he came out and said, we plan to pull the USA out of the agreement as soon as we can. It was a 3-year agreement, so you can't pull out until that 3 years is over, and that ends on November 4th, 2019. 3 years after the agreement was signed. So most likely Donald Trump will pull the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement because he will be still be president in 2019. Now in 2020, if a Democrat were elected, they might would sign us back in, but you never know. Take a few minutes and answer your 3 daily objectives.